Okay, hi everybody. So sometimes there are things that I want to talk about, but I don't think justify a fully fleshed out video really, for one reason or another. And there's three things that I want to talk about today. One is Black Lives Matter and the business of hashtags really. The other is social media and dating and how things have changed and yet our expectations have remained the same, and the way in which those two things seem to have clashed. And the third is some drama involving the likes of Shane Dawson and Jeffree Star in the YouTube beauty community, which is, you can probably tell, is not a community that I have frequented particularly over the years. But that's developing into a right shitstorm, and I just wanted to make a few sort of comments on that. Some of these are things that perhaps in the past I would have made fully fledged videos on, maybe would have asked for pledges amongst my patrons and all this kind of thing. But honestly, the kind of things which I'm at a point now, I don't think they merit that. But the things that I'm musing over, the things that I'm interested in at the moment, and so I thought that this second channel was the perfect venue, really, just to voice them. And the first is this business of Black Lives Matter. Recently, I've made a couple of sort of videos on some of this and the George Floyd situation and all that lot on my main channel. But what I was interested in really, because I don't know, those of you who follow football, especially in the UK, could not help have noticed that they've made a decision, quite a remarkable decision actually. All the players do not have their names on their shirts. They've all got Black Lives Matter written on the back of the shirt, which is a bit of an eye-opener, really. The Premier League has always taken a very, very strong stance against political messaging, and any player or official or manager of a team or anybody like that, coach of a team, making a political statement on the field of play or tying that within Premier League games. So much so, I think it was only last year that Pep Guardiola, of course, the manager stroke coach of Manchester City, one of the most successful teams over the last few years, had worn a ribbon or something to show solidarity with the Catalans and their independence movement, and they fined him for that tiny little transgression of this rule. And yet here they are insisting, it would seem, mandating that every single player goes out on the pitch with a political slogan on the back. Indeed, it appears that I think a select committee or something like that at House of Commons has had a few questions with the Premier League, and one of the members has suggested that maybe they're opening up a can of worms there. And I would kind of agree with that. Even if it's a fairly uncontroversial statement, if it's just taken at face value that Black Lives Matter and we'd like to see less racism and black people to experience less racism, even if it's seemingly very uncontroversial, then where does it end? Right, what's to stop other people? Why can't other people make these political slogans? And if they get fined for it, are they going to say to the Premier League, what, so you're disagreeing with me? You're saying that this cause that I'm supporting you disagree with, that it's an immoral cause or whatever? It's opening up a can of worms. But what it seems to me is more interesting, because the Premier League has had to come out and issue a statement dissociating themselves from the Black Lives Matter movement. And Sir Keir Starmer, who's now the leader of the Labour Party, was put on the spot as well on television, and he had to distance himself from some of the claims. In terms of Sir Keir Starmer, it was mainly in terms of calls to defund the police. Of course, he's a previous director of public prosecutions, so the idea that he would be in favour of defunding or abolishing the police force is laughable. If anybody understands the importance of a police force, it would be him. So he had to distance himself there. The Premier League, I think, with regard to these anti-Semitism claims that are being made against the BLM UK movement. But you have this kind of slightly obnoxious, in my view, underpinning to this, which is that the Black Lives Matter movement is effectively, it's a very, very left-wing sort of manifesto that they have. They're very anti-capitalism, sort of pro-Marxism, very hard economically left underpinning to it. And you have these footballers, some of whom are earning hundreds of thousands of pounds a game. There's something slightly distasteful about them going out onto the pitch, in my view. It kind of makes me wince a little bit, with a slogan on the back of the name of a political movement that despises the kind of capitalism of which they are some of the greatest beneficiaries in the world. They are amongst the most privileged people alive. There are some people that capitalism funds to even greater degrees, but they're not going out and playing sport, enjoying themselves, doing the sport that they live, that they love, to earn the kinds of amounts in 1 week that most people only earn over a period of years doing something that you love, and have a slogan that applies to a sort of very left-wing anti-capitalist movement. There's something slightly distasteful about that, I think. And so this is the problem, I think, and this is not the first time this has cropped up. You could say it's cropped up with the Me Too hashtag as well, and with a number of others, where you end up with a hashtag and maybe an underlying movement that are not always the same thing. So there's a basic ideological position, but then there's a movement behind it that has more to it than that, you know. And this is, I think, what you're seeing with the Black Lives Matter. Of course, Black Lives Matter, of course, and just sort of taken at face value. Who wouldn't get behind it? But of course, there's more to it than that. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the discussions that used to take place when YouTube was spending more time talking about feminism, where people would throw out, well, how can you not believe in the equality for women? And yet, of course, feminism is a whole lot more things. Yes, that is feminism, but it's also an ideology incorporating such things as gender theory, patriarchy theory. It's also a set of goals. It's also a methodology within social studies departments that are applied to a whole range of subjects. It's really not as simple as that. And so when something just gets hidden behind a hashtag, I think it's a recipe for real disaster. I'm interested to see where this goes, because the people who run these organisations that are the main people in Black Lives Matter in the United States, and also those within the UK perhaps to a lesser extent, they're not about to abandon their fundamental ideological positions for the greater good of the hashtag, i.e. simply to water down what it is that they believe in, purely to support, I suppose, the root issue, which is the status of black people and ending racial discrimination, because they've got other fish to fry that they're interested in. They're not going to abandon that, and so of course they then become a potential ongoing source of embarrassment to anybody who just takes that hashtag at face value and then plasters it all over their corporate livery, you know, in their corporate colours all over their different messages. So it's kind of interesting. It's a very, very modern state of affairs, I think, that kind of interplay between those two things. And in terms of modern states of affairs, I wanted to talk about sort of dating and online flirting in the social media age. By the way, just let me point out, because you can probably see the top of this t-shirt, this is a t-shirt that a workmate gave me. It's a sort of Che Guevara but with Jeremy Corbyn on it. He bought me it because he said, I saw the t-shirt and immediately thought of you, Jim, being such a wonderful fan of Jeremy Corbyn. I thought I'd buy you it because I knew you'd never wear it, so I just thought I'd slip it on today. But yeah, another, I suppose you could say, in this case, an unhappy confluence of the old and new, I think, is what's happening with sort of social media and dating and flirting. And what I mean by that is, the new is there is clearly a very new set of rules that people have to abide by. And the latest example of this, and maybe I'll show you a couple of things online on the screen, involved somebody called something like, I've forgotten now, Bubbles or something like that. Some Twitch streamer, and the guy who is involved, I think he's the main guy involved in a fighting game called Skullgirls, and Skullgirls has some slightly risque elements. And what had happened was this woman, this Twitch streamer, had got in touch with him, and she's one of these streamers. She got in touch with him and complimented him on the fact. She was talking about sexual issues. She was talking about the fact she was so pleased that there was a BDSM character in the game. And he responded and says, oh, well, I don't really know how to take that. But yeah, thanks, fair enough. And he sort of said, well, yeah. They had a little bit of an exchange. And he said, there's probably a couple of questions I'd like to ask you, but I won't because they're maybe not the right questions to ask you. And she says, like I say, I will. I'll throw these up on screen. And she says, no, ask away. Ask me anything. So he asks her the questions. And one of the questions, the question that she took offence to, I think, and made this big furore over, and then Kotaku, the online gaming magazine, picked it up and talked about how he was a creep. So therefore, this guy's a creep, and this is another example of unacceptable male behaviour online, unwanted attention, and all this kind of thing. And so, what he'd asked her was, is part of her work on Twitch about self-validation, right? And to be quite honest, I'll also show you some pictures of her. And this is off her Twitter, and these are like the first pictures. The first one's like the pictures are off a pinned tweet. And if you look at her pictures, she has lots of sort of cosplay and other pictures where effectively, I mean, she's got a cracking figure, she's got a great pair of tits, quite frankly, and clearly she's wearing garments that attempt to show that off to the best, to titillate the people who are viewing her material, and to get a positive reaction for people to tell her how wonderful she looks, and because it gains you an audience, doesn't it? Let's be honest. I mean, I looked through more of her tweets than I would have done had she not been dressed like that. So it's obviously having an effect, right? She's using her very, very tasty figure to full effect, and I don't blame her for that. But I think it's a fair question, actually. Is there an element of self-validation in that? I think a lot of people, when they dress up on a night out and they hope for some compliments, male or female, are hoping for a little bit of self-validation. I think what she said that she thought this was a sexist. He was being very sexist asking this question. There's no way that he would have asked it to a male Twitch streamer. I wouldn't expect him to, because male Twitch streamers do not have the ability to do that. Neither do ugly, flat-chested, generally unattractive female Twitch streamers. But she's making hay where she can, I suppose, and it's a legitimate question if a male Twitch streamer was all the time flexing his muscles or preening his hair, or saying, look, I've had a fake tan, or I've been working on my abs, or whatever. Then that would be a legitimate question to ask there, wouldn't it? Are you sort of fishing for compliments? Do you get some kind of validation with that? So, and yet all this, I've shown you it on screen, it all seemed incredibly fucking mundane. And it occurs to me, I mean, this is not the only example of this I've seen. There's barely a week goes by you don't get a couple of examples of somebody being called out, and it's almost always a man, for overstepping the mark, for saying something which is creepy, which is a word that's only applied to men, right? Never mind the fact, because what I'm going to say is that there's a sort of different standard, I think, for men and women, or for men and non-gender binary people and women. And creepy is a perfect example, because that is a word you only ever hear applied to men, regardless of what's being said. And so what I find interesting is we have this new set of rules, and this new set of rules where people are very, very interested, I think, in policing and picking apart things that men say. If a man wants to sort of flirt and try it on a bit, I mean, she contacted him and immediately started talking about BDSM and talking about that, right? So, and that was all fine. It was him that overstepped the mark, and I don't see that he wrote anything that was any further really along the line than she was doing. So we have this kind of asymmetry there that's part of this new standard. But we're not totally sort of accepting the new. We still have, like I say, a confluence of the new and the old, because at the same time we still have very, very traditional set of expectations, which is that men will do the chasing. That still seems to be the way things are. In fact, I saw this recently. This guy I'll see if I can look the video out and throw a link up. He got a friend of his, a female friend of his, to take his photos, and he's a good looking chap, and to use them and to create a Tinder persona and see how she got on Tinder, and see how her experiences of being a man on Tinder, male face, I suppose, maybe you could criticise her for doing man face or something. But that's what she did. So she used his pictures, created a flattering sort of persona, and she said that her experiences on Tinder were nothing like they were as a woman. She didn't get a fraction of the attention, even though she regarded her friend as a good-looking guy. And she said it was really strange. I don't know how Tinder works, you left click or right click, and if the other person's clicked the same way, that shows you're both interested in each other. And she said that as a woman, if she ever responded to a guy who'd done it, she'd always get plenty of response. And yet even the women that had swiped left or right or whatever, to say they were interested in her online male persona, they still didn't respond. And she said she couldn't understand that. Why would they swipe that way and yet still just didn't want to engage? It was like, and the reason is clear, is because it's still we're still very, very traditional. We still have the same understanding as we did 30 fucking years ago, when I was going out and dating, which is that women stand there, they put more effort in probably pre-production wise prior to going out, but they just stand there, and it's up to the guy then. The guys have to be a little bit like, if you see, I saw a sort of David Attenborough video the other day, and there was this little bird of paradise, and it's preparing its area, and in his dulcet tones Attenborough's saying how he's make sure the whole area is clear, ready for his display. And there she is, the female, and then this bird of paradise, it's got these black wings, and it goes boomf like this, and there's this bright iridescent blue grin and these two bright iridescent blue eye spots, and it's dancing round. It's fucking amazing. I mean, if I'd been that female bird, right, I'd have been like, whoa, that'll do it for me. And she just sort of stood there like, yeah, I'll go and have a look elsewhere. Right, I felt really sorry. He took a right slapping to his pride, that bird. And yet that's kind of what happens when you went out. When I was young, as a guy, you went out, you had to do the running. It was guys had to approach. They had to put themselves on the line, effectively. And I don't think anything has changed. And let me just say, I think it's one of these situations I have empathy with both sides, right? I always had a lot of empathy with women back then, because I always felt it must be great having guys coming and trying it on with you, if it's a guy you like. But it's never very easy knocking somebody back, is it? I remember once, years back, when I lived in Southampton, and I was working straight after university in just a sort of place-holding job, and a female member of staff came to me and asked me out, and I didn't fancy her at all, and I had to knock her back, and I didn't do it very well. I didn't do it in a very empathetic way. I'll be honest, I didn't really know what to say, and I just sort of said, I'm not attracted to you. No, really. To put it blunt, I was maybe quite as blunt as that. And then another female member of staff, one of her friends, who was also I was friendly with, she came to me later on and gave me a right telling off for handling it that way, and being so unempathetic. But it wasn't really that I was being unempathetic. I knew that what I'd said was brutal and harsh, but I found it a difficult situation, and I didn't really know how to let her down gently. That's a set of skills that men generally don't have to possess. It's women that have to possess those skills. How to brush men off without deflating them too much and having to put up with that, with tension from guys. It must get a bit of a piss off. At least as a guy, if you want to go out and you're not interested in that, you don't have to deal with it. But at the same stage as a guy, you have to deal with the fact that the guys who always do well are the guys who don't care. Right, this is maybe why people talk about women are attracted to bastards. I don't think that's what it is. It's that the guys who are bastards and the guys who are sort of slightly sociopathic in some instances and just don't care. They can get rejected 20 times. It doesn't knock them one jot. It just water off a duck's back to them. They always do brilliantly. They'll go out on a night out and they'll go around chatting to woman after woman. It doesn't matter if the first 50 women show no interest in them whatsoever, and make it quite candid that they're not attracted to them at all. It gives them no hit to their ego at all. It doesn't make them feel depressed or lower their self-worth. But most people, including most men, are not like that. It is a bit of a hit to get knocked back. And that is what you have to suffer as a guy. And if the situations were reversed, I'm sure that men would appreciate the bad side of being a woman, and women would appreciate just how tough it is being the one that has to put yourself on the line, has to come up with something that doesn't sound too cringeworthy, right, and to make that step and risk the rejection. But I do think that maybe that needs to happen a bit, because as I say, it's a kind of really odd situation now that we're policing. I put it to you that we're policing men more than women here. We're sort of being much more sensitive to what men say. Men say things which women would get away. We just laugh. Well, it's only a little womany woo woo. What possible harm can they do if they overstep the mark, or if they're a little bit too pushy, or if they say something that was a bit too risque or whatever? And we've always had that attitude, haven't we? It's just the same as if my wife and I was to go into our town centre and she was to strip her clothes off and run down the road, a bit of public nudity. That's all a bit of fun. If I was to do it, right, then I'm some kind of horrific creep. We've always sort of viewed these things, I think, in slightly different terms. And now we're putting that into the sort of dating sphere and picking apart in the online world, because this is what's happening. This is where it's changed in the online world now, with social media and not just publicly, but private messages, which everybody can then look at. We can pick things apart line by line and say, maybe that word and this phrase, and maybe that pushed it a bit too much, and Jesus Christ. And it's the things that men say that are being policed the hardest, and yet at the same time, the expectation is that it's men that still have to do the chasing. We've still remained traditional in that. And that seems a bit harsh, quite honestly. It's like, right, here's a whole new world of tripwires. So many tripwires that it's probably not possible that you're going to avoid them all. The only way you'll avoid them all is to not play the game and just sit back and say, well, women, you're just going to have to come to me. But we haven't made that change. We're still running under the old rules where men have to do the chasing and women expect the man to make the move. So I don't know. Something's going to have to give somewhere down the line there, isn't it? It just seems a slightly unfair set of circumstances. That was the second hot take thing that's been running around my head. The third one involved... So somebody linked this to me and started talking to me about this. I think it was Sarah Michelle and Lizzie Lang, I think, were talking about it. And it involved some of the online YouTube beauty community. And a whole load of characters, some of whom I'd never heard of. I had heard of Shane Dawson. And this is like, all of this lot is like, this is proper sort of soap opera shit, this. And to cut a long story short, there are several different things. There's things that Shane Dawson has done in the past, which people are now criticising him for, some of which involved people of sort of 11 or 12 years old. He got some girl of about 12 or 13, he was asking her to twerk on camera. Another one, I think the most unsavoury one, I think, was a 12-year-old niece, I think, and he was having a sort of sex discussion with her, which was really, it wasn't the right way. You know, it was done for, the problem was it was done for sensationalism. He was doing to shock people, and so he was asking her things and telling her things about sex, which he really, it was just not the way that you would do it. And oh, the other one was Willow Smith, who's Will Smith's daughter or something or other, and him pretending to masturbate over a picture, poster when she was, this poster of her as an 11-year-old. These are things he'd done years ago, by the way, but these are all things, I understand people's outrage at some of those things. And I think the real difference between what makes those particularly unpalatable versus some things that other people may do is that they are specific individuals. He's not just making a bad taste joke about shagging kids or something, which might classify as a bad taste joke. But let's be honest, off the internet, everybody makes bad taste jokes about things, and we understand sometimes they're bad taste jokes, and sometimes that's why they're funny, because they're in such bad taste. They're not things that any of us subscribe to. They're just, you know, like I remember who sponsored one of the space shuttles that had burst into flames, and it was 7-Up, right? Because 7 astronauts had burnt to death in this thing. So that was the joke. Bad taste joke. That's what bad taste jokes are about. But I think once you talk about specific individuals, or you are involving specific individuals like that, that's a whole different scale of things. Because there's somebody who actually could suffer on behalf of that. For you to have made that joke, there is a sort of a particular person who's the fall guy, and that person, especially when that person is a minor, by which I mean a young person, not somebody who's digging for coal, of course, then I think that's particularly egregious. So I kind of got that. I will just say, before I move on to the central bit of what I wanted to talk about with this, you can maybe see why I wanted to do it in this free-form thing and not do a sort of proper pledged video on my main channel. But I will just say, with regard to that, I think there's a lot of hypocrisy with the criticism as well, because a lot of the people who are criticising Shane Dawson now must be people who are already aware of it, and yet we're still fans of him, or we're still laughing along, who found it reasonably acceptable at the time. And I find that a little bit hypocritical. I think if you're going to be too hard on somebody, it's all right if you didn't know about it. And you have to be honest with yourself. If 10 years ago or whenever it was he did that, how would you have responded to it then? If you're honest with yourself and you say, well, I'd probably have laughed along and thought, oh, how shocking, but you'd have been okay with it. Well, then really, you've got to let bygones be bygones, I think. And not say, no, you need to be cancelled on the back of that. If you could be honest with yourself and say, as I actually could be, no, I'd have found that distasteful back then, and I think pretty much feel the same about it now as I did then I think you've every right to say, yeah, that's pretty distasteful, I think. But I think people need to be honest. There's a lot of hypocrisy. There's a lot of, there but for the grace of God go I. There is a lot of, if I'd been in his position, I could well have fallen foul of the same things that he fell foul of. As I could be, because I have made videos back then and they're still online, but I didn't do anything like that. So I suppose I can be a little bit sniffy on that particular thing. But that was one of the Shane Dawson dramas. Then the other Shane Dawson drama, this is all happening at the same time. It involves somebody called Jeffree Star, who apparently is really well known. He's a male. I think he identifies as a man, uses he, him, his, whatever pronouns. But he looks like he makes himself up the same way as a woman would do. And he's become, I suppose it's a little bit, there's sort of echoes of the way that we associate women with cooking, and yet a lot of the top chefs, most of the top chefs are men. He's kind of tried to do the same thing, I suppose, in a way. He's tried to become like top makeup guru, because most people are going to be interested in his makeup. 95% of those are going to be women, and yet he's a guy. But he's tried to sort of make a career out of that, and he's made a very successful career. I think he's got about 10 million YouTube subscribers, and apparently he's a right nasty fucking piece of work, it would seem. He made a video some time ago where he said that he got dirt on everybody, and he sounds like he's a sort of behind the scenes he's a bit of a manipulative twat. by the sound of it. And there's quite a lot of dramas involving that, and quite a lot of people talking about him as effectively being a sort of Teflon-coated character, and sort of always seems to get away with everything. And I don't know whether he's going to get away with it this time. It's kind of interesting. There was another furore a year ago with a guy called James Charles, where somebody called Tati Westbrook had made a video criticising James. I can't believe I'm talking. It sounds like it's all like sort of Big Brother, or I'm a Celebrity, or one of these shite on the wall documentary, fly on the wall documentary things. But it's kind of interesting. So Tati Westbrook had made this video criticising James Charles, who's a gay man, of going after straight men and shagging them, right? Convincing them to shag him or something, and making a big thing that this is what I like to do, sort of mislead straight men or something. And she'd slagged him off for this. Some of which she reckoned that James Charles had told her directly, but now she's saying that it was all, she'd been hoodwinked by Jeffree Star and Shane Dawson, and now she's playing it's the kind of character that I really hate with women, where they regress back from the equality position to the little womeny woo-woo, innocent-eyed. She started a video, she was crying after about a minute. If you're crying after a minute, stop recording and start again, I think. I really do, because crying after 20 minutes, fair enough, but it did seem a little bit manipulative. But there's probably some truth in what she says with regard to James Charles and Jeffree Star, and they may have been steering her in that direction, but it just doesn't all fit in, because some of the things were sort of direct experiences, and it all just sounds like an absolute fucking mess. And what is interesting in all of that for me is just how fucking desperate all these people are. And it's a sorry state of affairs, and I don't see it changing. I've always been lucky. When I started on YouTube, this wasn't a job. It is a job now. I do rely on some income from this to justify me doing it, but it's a second job. So I don't have to be desperate and chase everything. But these people do, really. And of course, the thing with money is you never have enough of it. So at first you might just be chasing a YouTube channel that allows you to make a living, but then you realise I could actually become pretty wealthy out of this. And then when you become pretty wealthy out of this, you want to maintain that. You don't want that income to dry up, and you see the next level. With these beauty people, they start off reviewing products, and then they can get their own as a sort of what's the saying now, sort of cultural influencer, an influencer's sort of makeup brand, and they'll work with somebody else that makes makeup properly to have their little range, and then all of their fans will buy their makeup. So that's the next level to get to that, and then the level beyond that would be the level where people who aren't followers of you are buying your makeup, and of course then the sky's the limit. You can make an absolute small fortune doing that. So there's this constant thing with these people to try and be bigger and better, and with that, talk about power corrupting, and to get anywhere in society. And this isn't a capitalist thing or anything, because the same thing happens in countries like the Soviet Union or anywhere where there's any kind of power structure, which is anywhere. People are going to tread on other people to try and get somewhere. And that's everything smacks. Every single aspect of this smacks of that. Shane Dawson was doing the things that he was doing because he wanted to shock people, because shocking people made his channel bigger, and now he makes a video saying how much he regrets it. Well, he can regret it now because he's already there. It served its purpose. If he went back, would he do it again? Of course he would, because if he didn't do it again, he wouldn't have millions of subscribers. He wouldn't have become what he is now. Far better for him to do it and then show contrition for it afterwards. And however genuine his contrition is now, if you put him back in time, he'd have to face up to the fact that if he didn't do those things, he wouldn't be as successful as he is now. And I don't think he would surrender. that you have people like this Tati Westbrook, who did what she did with regard to this James Charles and gained a huge amount of exposure for it, and now she's gaining a huge amount of exposure for now reversing the position. And now that Shane Dawson and this Jeffree Star are so vulnerable, let's stick the knife into them and try and look like I'm the good one again. It's absolutely fucking savage, all of it. And that savagery, you can understand it in the political arena. This is in the online beauty community, for crying out loud. And it just goes to show, wherever there is fame, wherever there's prestige, wherever there's power, wherever there's money at stake, these things are going to happen, and people are going to regress to the sort of lowest common denominator. I think probably leave it there. What I will say is, with regard to that, I watched a film the other day called The Platform. If you haven't seen it, see it. Really good. This platform comes down through these different levels. It's like a prison, and every month you're on a different level. And how it starts is they put food on. There's maybe some spoilers here. Sorry, spoiler alert. They put the food on the top level, and then there's probably enough food for everybody, is the theory. Probably isn't, actually. But if everybody just took what they needed off this platform, then every level in this prison would get the food. 2 people per level. But of course that doesn't happen. Good thing, good film, because what I liked about the film is that it didn't just suggest that the people up there, because it's obviously talking about, it's sort of giving a sort of figurative metaphor for our society, where there's some people higher, some people lower, and the higher people shit on the lower people. But that would have just been easy to leave it at that, and they didn't do that with the film. Because he starts off on a middle tier, and the guy he's in, who's a sort of more seasoned inmate, the guy tries to shout up to the floor above, and he says there's no point shouting up to them. They're not going to talk to us. They regard us as scum. So he starts shouting down to the person below him, and his roommate says, don't shout down at them. They're scum. They're filth. We don't talk to them. They're in a floor below us. And when they end up on a higher floor, his roommate is totally unapologetic, adopts all the same behaviours that he was criticising the higher floors for when he was on a lower floor. And I thought that aspect of it was bang on, because that is what people are like. Most people are very high and mighty about what some other group is doing and how much better they are. And really the differences in their behaviour and that other group's behaviour is more a function of where they are than some intrinsic characteristic of their personality. And once they're in that other position, they'll act exactly the same. And they'll betray all the same weaknesses and flaws and what we would regard as sort of negative personal characteristics as the people that they criticise. Okay, a bit waffly, all of that. Apologise if it's bored any of you, but there were 3 things that I found interesting over the last couple of weeks that I didn't really want to make a main structured video on, but I just wanted to get off my chest. Okay, thank you for watching, and bye for now.